You're listening to the Montessori Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Hubbli. In this show, Jono Landon draws on his vast experience and expertise to deliver actionable advice to Montessori school administrators who are ready to take the next steps toward running a more efficient and sustainable private school business. Welcome back to the Montessori Leadership Podcast. We are so glad that you have decided to invest some more of your valuable time with us. I am Jared Morris. I am here with Jono Landon, proud father of two, and the founder and CEO of Hubbli, the all-in-one parent communication system for Montessori schools, which you can learn more about at hubbli.com. Jono, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Wonderful to be here again.
It is. And hopefully everybody had a chance to listen to the introductory episode to the podcast where you gave some of your backstory and talked about the work that you have done at Hubbli and your experiences with Montessori schools and what led to you wanting to start this podcast. And you kind of provided the overall big picture for what people can expect to learn with this show. And in that first episode, we talked about the series that we're going to do to kick this podcast off. And that's what we're going to start today is our 9-part series on the metrics of Montessori school growth. And so what we're going to do in this episode, kind of the kickoff episode for the series, is provide a high-level overview of 8 individual metrics that impact Montessori school growth. And then over the next 8 episodes, we'll be going into more depth about how you can impact each one to drive more and better business results while continuing to provide a great educational experience, which is always at the heart of any Montessori school's success. So let's begin at the high level, Jono, and why is it so important to Montessori school administrators and leadership to care about these metrics for growth that we're going to talk about and be proactive about impacting them in a positive and strategic way?
Yeah, well, caring about them for their own right is probably less important unless you really, unless you find yourself just liking to nerd out about business metrics, like me, or my team. But that's pretty, it's rare that I meet folks like that. And if I do, usually it's a couple that own or run the school. One of them is kind of like the business nerd guy or girl, and the other one is more the passionate teacher. So the reason why everybody should care about it is because the result of great business management is like beyond most Montessori schools are nonprofit, so it's not about money. I don't think anybody that is just a hungry capitalist trying to make as much money as possible, they're not going to get into the Montessori world. You don't see that too often. But so that's kind of a natural result of having a great school being run and just obvious sort of efficiencies built in to great organizations and operations. The result will be there's more net revenue at the end of the day to either, hopefully reinvest into the school and improve things. So that's really the reason why. It's to allow everybody to focus on what they really love to do, to create margin in their day, so that they're not spending hours just managing, newsletters and enrollment forms and field trip forms and yearbook forms and all these different vendors and all the hundreds of things that administrators and teachers have to do on an administrative level. That is time not well spent. It's necessary, it's critical. These things have to get done or you lose your licensing, right? But that's not what anyone's really there for. They're there to be with face to face with children, with parents, with their other team members, for the main purpose of giving children and their families a great educational experience.
These metrics, we're getting ready to list them out and then talk about them. Are they in any type of sequential or hierarchical order? Does sequence make a difference?
Sometimes it depends. Yes, they actually are all working with each other, and depending on what so you wouldn't necessarily start with one. There is one that most schools need to start with, which is we'll get into them.
Mhm.
But depending on the scenario, it's kind of like it's they're all um, they're all there and they're all being worked on, whether anybody knows it or not. These 8 metrics, in when you go to business school, they call them KPIs, key performance indicators. They exist, and every single business or organization in the world lives or dies by them. You can't get away from them. It's kind of like air. It's
Yeah.
but you may not realize that it's something that you should even think about. We Some of these are probably going to make people kind of sit back and say, "Well, how do you work on that?" Or "Why is that important?" Some of them are going to be more obvious. Well, they're going to be like, "Yeah, duh, of course," but what's not so obvious is how the obvious ones affect the less obvious key performance indicators, and how all of them work together in conjunction to um, to actually help the other or hinder the other, which
Yeah.
is sometimes the case, unfortunately.
All right, so let's start going through these 8, and we'll start with number 1, which is retention rate. And this one is built on the idea that it is always easier to keep a customer than to go find a new one. And in this case, it's always easier to keep families than it is to find and enroll new families.
hmm Yeah, so retention rate. I mean, you talk to any school leader and they're going to say, yeah, retention rate is really important. Oftentimes, when I ask schools, like, what's your retention rate? They don't know. And they can figure it out. But this is something that you would generally, if you're running an organization that depends on, you know, I mean, depends on tuition and students being enrolled, that's something that you should be able to just pull out of your head at any point in time. So uh, you know, the problem is that, again, people running schools are always understaffed, underfunded, um, undertimed. Like, they just don't have enough time. There's fires going on, people getting pulled in every direction all the time. So making the time, carving out the time to actually know, or know without even having to look anything up, what the retention rate is it's unfortunately, it's not all that realistic for most Montessori directors.
And again, as we go through the subsequent episodes, we're going to dive into each one of those in real detail, give it its own episode, provide some specific advice, specific steps that you can take to improve them, just providing overviews on them right here. So number 1, retention rate. Number 2 is traffic, which is essentially, new families who are finding your school and getting qualified prospects that could potentially become families that are part of your school.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of times when I go over these metrics, because I do oftentimes review these with schools. We do consulting with them, so we don't just provide them a system to actually improve all of these metrics. We do offer consulting on them, and they, I try to find analogies that make things simple. So if you think of traffic, um, let's say you're a shoe store. Well, like, you're a shoe store in a mall. So traffic is people walking by the front of your store. How many people are walking by and seeing the sign and saying, "Oh, there's a shoe store over there"?
Yeah, just seeing it. We're not to the point where they're walking in yet. They're just
Right.
seeing it. Potential customers. Uh, Number 3 then is opt-ins. So these would be actual new inquiries about enrollments. And so, to continue the example that you were just using, if you're the shoe store, then this would be actually people who are walking into the store and trying a pair of shoes on.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So that would be the definition of an opt-in. Or more directly to a Montessori school, let's say people walking into your school. Like a lot of schools get walk-in inquiries, or they get calls or word of mouth referrals from other parents that are really happy with the school. So these are, that's what an opt-in is. You call it an inquiry or a request for a tour.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got retention rate, traffic, and opt-ins. Now, number 4, this, you said some of these, it's going to be like, no duh. And, number 4 is kind of one of those, right? Which is new enrollments. And it's pretty straightforward, what this is and why it's going to matter, for improving your bottom line.
Yeah. So obviously, new enrollments doesn't really need much explanation. So, at the same time, how you affect the total number of enrollments that you need is going to come in. You're going to want to be working on all the other metrics, and by doing so, that will impact new enrollments. Um, although, like, let's say traffic opt-ins seems to be required steps for getting new enrollments, you do have to look at it as a separate metric, because from the point of somebody coming in to learn about the school to the point of them enrolling their child in the school, there is quite a long process for that family to go through to either be approved by the school or for the school to be approved by the parents.
Yeah.
And to also make sure that it's a good fit. And to also, maybe even more importantly, for the school to be in a position to be selective and not have their back up against the wall taking anybody, because not everybody is a good fit for every school.
Yeah. And you, as you just mentioned, you're starting to see these work together. And then as you improve your new enrollment rate, then as you improve your retention, that puts you in an even better position, especially if you're qualifying the right families from the beginning, which leads us in to number 5. And this is one that didn't immediately jump out to me, but it becomes pretty obvious once you explain it. But this is children per family, and this idea of prioritizing families with multiple children. So is that what you mean by, when you're in a position of strength as a school, when you have a lot of qualified leads and you can kind of choose who you're going to prioritize instead of just being like, we'll take anybody because we have to fill spots?
Right. So children per family. So that's one of the ways you can be selective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, so a lot of times when I bring this up to people, they're like, well, how do you influence people to have more children? Like, that's not, it can sound weird. It's like, that's a weird one to, but you're right. It really comes down to, let's say you've got two families that are, you've got, two families that are, they've gone through the enrollment, the admissions process. They're both great, perfect matches for your school, but one of them has 3 children, the other one has 1 child. You should lean towards, right? If you have to select one, then you should go with the family that has 3 kids, because that's going to ultimately give you 3 for the price of 1. So at some point, it comes to, like, if both families on a match level, on an ideal fit level, if all things are equal that way, then you have to make a business decision.
Yeah. Number 6 is average program tuition. And I imagine that this is one that causes a lot of fear and can cause some indecision, because it can be scary to raise tuition, and wonder what the impact will be, wonder if you will lose people. But you think that this is an important one, being strategic about how often you raise tuition, and I would imagine also, how you frame it when it happens.
Yeah, this is a sensitive topic. And this is something where I've been in the middle of webinars with some of the, the most well-known Montessori, sort of Montessori consultants. And we've gotten into this discussion, and I suggest that, the rate at which you can raise your tuition is much higher than most people think. And we'll get into that in later episodes, but for now, what I'll say is most schools, unfortunately, drastically undervalue themselves. So that's one thing. So number one, they're way below market. That happens quite often. Number two, there's a fear around raising rates because they're afraid they're not going to get the enrollment. But if those other metrics are all being worked on, you're in a better position to increase your enrollment. And number three, and a very important consideration is, again, most of these schools are nonprofit. Most of the schools have subsidies or will find subsidies, and every school, the more full paying families you have, and if you focus on getting that minimum number first, certainly if you're going to be advertising and spending money to pull in these families, that puts you in a better position to actually offer families that need financial assistance or subsidies to join. So sometimes there's a sort of misplaced compassion in the process of charging for the tuition. And not that the compassion shouldn't be there, but it's just how do you actually take your compassion and actually help more people with it in a better way? And that would be families that want to pay. And if you're doing a great job on all the other metrics, the traffic and the opt-ins and the retention rate, you're in a if you're you can be more selective, and you can have those families that have the resources and are happy to pay a higher tuition to help fund the families that need the help. But it's a lot easier to give and support other people when your cup is overfloweth, so to speak.
Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to when we get to that episode. So we're running down here the 8 key metrics of Montessori school business growth. We've talked about retention rate and traffic and opt-ins. Those are the first 3. Then we talked about new enrollments, children per family, and average program tuition. Let's hit the last 2 here, Jono. Number 7 is programs per child. And to clarify, when you talk about programs per child, are you talking about like different enrichment programs that you're bringing in to the school, or is something else meant by this?
Yeah, no, that's certainly one of the ways. And so what we see is schools are generally offering different type, like morning drop-offs, early drop-off, late pickup, enrichment programs, and that's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
And I think what's really, really key that it's worthwhile to say in this episode is that we're talking about working on all of these metrics incrementally, improving them and moving their performance up just by small increments, one at a time. And by doing so, when we can improve, let's say, every one of these metrics by 10% from one year to the next, that will have a drastic overall result on the net margins of the organization. So what we're not trying to, and what's really important is that if this isn't seen as a manageable process, it's going to fail. It has to be manageable. Goals have to be, reasonable. They have to be smart, right? So they have to be attainable. And luckily, the even if you've got all the time in the world, the best way to work on all of these metrics is to focus on one at a time and try to just improve them each incrementally, not try to improve them by 100%. So, we're not trying to make sure we've got 3 children to every family, but maybe if we have an average of 1.3 children, per family, and you can move that up to 1.5, like that's going to have a large impact.
Yeah.
Same thing with programs per child, right? So it's just about understanding, like, and you need a system because you need a tracking method, and you need to know, you need to be able to focus and be creative inside each one of these different strategic goals. So it's just important that, again, it's just all about being manageable. It's all about being digestible and having a practical way to approach each one of these metrics. So certainly programs per child is one of those, again, we're getting into, like, from one year to the next, we want to improve these by only, maximum 10% per per metric.
The last one of the 8, and again, this is one that's going to seem pretty obvious why it's on this list, and what may not be so obvious is how you make improvements here, but that's what we're going to talk about when we get to this one, and that is profit margin, and the importance of knowing your profit margin per child, because the first step towards managing it and improving it is knowing what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we say profit margin, again, that's, that might be a more appropriate term for a private school, or a private for-profit school. But net margin is, a nonprofit obviously technically doesn't have profit, but it means there's a net result that's going to be reinvested into the school. And my belief is that even for sure, the majority of the for-profit private Montessori schools are, again, these are run by wonderful heroes that are not, in it for the profit. And I get into some discussions on Facebook with people on this topic, and a lot of people are very passionate about no school should be for profit. And what they don't realize is that, again, no one that's opening up a Montessori school is trying to be the next Donald Trump. Everybody is just trying to do what they love. And oftentimes, the red tape involved in creating a nonprofit is sometimes just not worth it. And they can just get their school running and get their licensing and do a great job and not be a nonprofit. And they're not, sometimes, and that depends on the region you're in, the country you're in, so, and even within, a state, you've got different counties, and there's all sorts of red tape that can slow people down from getting to the business of, giving children the best education possible.
As a final wrap-up question for you, I imagine that for someone listening to this and for someone who's presented with all 8 of these metrics, especially if these are not things that they have been focusing on before, my guess is it can be a little bit overwhelming, to see all of these and be like, oh man, I've got to manage all of these and improve them by 10%, all of that. And so I guess my question to you would be, for someone who, is earnest about improving these areas of their business and they see these metrics, what would be a step or two that they could take, kind of a small step to get moving that might indicate to them which one of these to start with? Because they all do interact and they can all impact each other, but it's also nice to have a place to start and maybe one to focus on right away. Is there a way to know for a particular school what's the best one to start with?
That's a really good question. So I would say the vast majority of schools need to start on the traffic side. I might even argue with myself. I would say it's either retention or traffic. If retention, well, I'll have to. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but retention is a tougher thing to start with because that is a result of something you already have. So the best way to actually work on retention is to improve the funnel from traffic into inquiries and then being enrolled, and making sure that you're in a position to be more selective. And when you can be more selective, you can really influence your retention rate. So I'll go back to my original suggestion, which was traffic.
Yeah.
Learning how and where to get in front of the most ideal prospective families is, I would say, step one. And you can, in this sort of section of the organization and the strategic work, you can kind of think of it like an assembly line. So you work on traffic, you get the traffic coming in, and then you work on the inquiry process, and you can start optimizing and tweaking that part of the assembly line, and then because there's work and there's steps, and the parents are going through mental processes from the point of seeing the school or learning about the school to deciding to inquire and sign up for a tour. And then there's a stage in the mental model of decision making from that point to being enrolled. And there is a process that every single human being goes through when making a buying decision. And that process does not change for anybody from any purchasing decision. And that could be, it can be a 2-second flash decision by clicking something online. especially with all the new tools that Amazon puts out to just make it so much easier to buy things. That process gets even faster, but you're still going through that process. And or the months it can take for a parent to go through the process of deciding where they're going to put their child.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the mental, psychological, or cognitive model. I actually have a degree in psychology. I am into this stuff too. Is it is set in stone. It's unchangeable. So knowing how to communicate with the prospective parents at the different stages of the funnel is, as an example, we'll get into this more deeply in a later episode, especially on the opt-ins, but how to communicate with a parent that's at the stage of the opt-in, of the inquiry. Oftentimes, we see schools selling the school far too early, like trying to kind of get, it's just a little bit too soon to get into certain things or certain value propositions, or it's like selling the school tour is job one. Just sell them on coming into the school. Don't try to sell them on the school. Just sell. I mean, that's the job of a website. Something I've gone into with many different webinars and many different customers. Don't try to sell your school through your website, because the parent doesn't make the decision until they meet you face to face. So your website is the entry point to get the parent into a face to face interaction. Don't try to sell the school too early. Don't try to sell Montessori too early. Right? Yeah. It's like you got to wait for the right moment and the right part of the decision making process that the prospective parent is at mentally. And there's and so anyway, so we'll get deep into this stuff, but that's I would say the place to start is just getting awareness. Yeah. Getting awareness happening, and then but there's quite a lot of there's a lot of tactics to that. There's tactics that work better today that are new tactics where the old tactics don't work nearly as well. We'll break all of these things down.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's a good place to stop for this episode. Again, the 8 key metrics for Montessori School business growth: retention rate, traffic, opt-ins, new enrollments, children per family, average program tuition, programs per child, and profit margin. In our subsequent episodes, we are going to go one by one through those, give you actionable advice so that you can improve on each one in a systematic way, and again, make your school better in so many different ways. So we're excited to do that, and we'll be doing that on the episodes that are coming up. Any final thoughts, Jono, before we sign off?
No, just thank you for listening, for joining us, and if you have any questions, we'll provide you ways for connecting with us. Certainly, you can just go to our website at hubbli.com, or you can email us directly at email me, Jono, Jono @hubbli.com. If you have any questions about as we go through these different sections, anything that I brought up before, if you want to, and hey, this will be posted on YouTube as well. If you want to argue with our points, go in there, go to YouTube, tell me where I'm wrong. I love not arguing, but I love debate. So certainly don't hold back. Tell us what you think, and we'll see you there.
Absolutely. For Jono Landon, I am Jared Morris, and we will talk to you next time on the Montessori Leadership Podcast.